Hello friends. Today I want to talk about stories, content, and how ideas are transmitted. I think this is important because in every domain of human pursuit, how we communicate and understand one another is through stories. We'll be diving into a little bit of the history. We'll be thinking about some frameworks on how we can tell stories, how we can tell impactful stories, meaningful stories that leave resonance with your audience. And we'll also be thinking about how this applies to us in the digital landscape. So I want to begin by thinking about ideas for a second. What is an idea? An idea is something intangible. It's one of those funny things that I think is really hard to define if you actually try and sit down and think about what it actually is. But if I were to express it in the best way I possibly could, it would be some sort of invisible thought that has consequences. Ideas are intangible thoughts that animate towards action. And the interesting thing about ideas is that they're invisible, but yet they have the potentiality to move. The greatest things we've been able to achieve as a species have all been birthed by a very great idea. And these ideas are kind of like seeds that are planted in the minds of people. Once these great ideas start to take hold of the mind, it is then upheld, supported, and bought into. It almost acts as an energy vortex. More people agree with a certain idea, and that idea begins to hold weight and to manifest into the real world. I wanted to start off with this basic principle of what an idea was. Think about the great ideas that have persisted and lasted the test of time. Government is an idea. The nation state, how we think about our identities as part of a citizen of a nation. Language, art, these are all things that were ideas that were birthed in the mind of a particular person. And through persistence and patience, they started to grow into something that manifested in our realities today. Ideas are really interesting because we have them all the time. You know, when you're taking a shower or when you've sat down in your desk and you think about what it is that you want to do. Whether you like it or not, ideas arrive in the mind. And we don't really give thought to how these ideas actually arrive, why it is that we have these thoughts. And this can be illustrated by thinking about a thought experiment. Imagine you had to predict what ideas you were going to have in the next 5 minutes. Could you do it? The answer is most probably no. We don't really understand how ideas arrive in the first place. But one thing that we do know is that when an idea arrives in our minds, we can either choose to align ourselves with that idea and start to enact upon it, which can then create tangible consequences on the physical plane. So, what does this all mean and why does it matter? I think firstly, if we can understand how things are created in the first place, we can think about how to create more meaningful things. I think that the act of taking an idea and making it into something real is the essence of the creative act. And so whether it be a building that was created by an architect, a piece of music that was created by a composer, or a dish that a chef creates from the kitchen. All of these things are ultimately the same framework: idea, alignment, persistence, creative act, manifestation. So if we think about the history of how ideas have been transmitted, we can then begin to see how ideas influence people. And this is where I think things get really interesting. How have humans communicated in our history? Let's go back all the way to ancient civilizations. I'm sure you've seen illustrations of cave paintings. What you can find in different caves in South America or Africa are cave paintings. And people have discovered paintings that were created thousands and thousands of years ago. And what you'll see is artwork of different animals and creatures. People who have left their handprints on the walls of these caves. And in a way, these relics and artifacts have something imprinted into them that communicates something. The handprint communicates, we were here. So the communication was done through the vehicle of cave paintings, through art. As civilization started to develop, as commerce began to arise, we started to discover more of a need to communicate more ideas. If I wanted to buy 3 cows from you and to trade it with you for textiles or spices, we would need to keep some sort of record. And so cuneiform is an example of a developed type of communication. Ancient civilizations would find ways to create systematized languages so that one human could interact with another to convey an idea to the other, and vice versa. The Chinese also developed technology to create paper, and our ability to communicate was heightened because we were able to distill a large amount of information into a very clear format through characters. And this is how language has influenced us and become a foundational part of what it means to be human. Then we think about the invention of the printing press. Now, in Gutenberg, once the printing press was created, one human could write a single book and distribute it to much more people, hundreds of people. And this is what we would call leverage. With the same amount of input, you have an increased amount of output. And that's what the printing press allowed us to do. Let's move on even further. We had the invention of the radio. One broadcaster was then able to distribute their voice to another geographic location. And so this technology was truly groundbreaking. Then we had the television, the DVDs. I'm sure people who grew up in the 90s to early 2000s can still remember VHS tapes and DVD players. We create films, we create movies. We were enabled to capture reality through moving motion pictures and to communicate through that specific format. Then the internet was born, and suddenly people around the globe were able to connect on a new degree. We were then able to communicate with people almost instantaneously through the World Wide Web. More recently, we have the invention of the iPhone, Steve Jobs, who revolutionized communication by giving people the ability to have computer processing power that fit into their own pockets. Then social media and softwares enabled us to see others, communicate with others, gave us that much more of an ability to shorten that distance between idea, person, and another person. And so we find ourselves here today. We're in the age of YouTube, Instagram, and large language models such as Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, and so on. If we look at the larger trend of the transmission of ideas throughout history, one thing we're beginning to see is that the distance between the person who's transmitting an idea and the person who's receiving it has really closed to an almost instantaneous distance. If you have an idea that's worth transmitting, you have the capacity now to be able to communicate with someone, to connect with someone, and to reach them in a way that would be unimaginable even a few hundred years ago. So why does this matter? I think it matters because of what this advancement in technology really implies. During the Industrial Revolution, it was only those who owned the factories who could use the capabilities of these machines to produce products, who could then reap the benefits from that technology. But with the age that we live in now, where everybody has a phone, most people have access to the internet, and most people have the ability to record themselves and then to distribute at a scale that is much larger than themselves, you essentially get a multiplication effect where your one voice, your one idea, your one creation has expanded in its potential to be able to communicate with someone else. And because this technology has become so accessible, the possibilities for you to be able to create something meaningful, for you to be able to say something of substance, and for that to then be transmitted to someone else, makes it such that your impact as an individual, as a creator, as a business owner, has only become enlarged that much more. So what is it that we can really do with this technology that can create a lasting impact, an impact that genuinely provides value to other people? This is where I want to shift our conversation and segue into the idea of stories, as well as content creation in the digital landscape. Stories are really important because they are repositories of meaning. If you think about any story, there's always a succession of events. There's a past, a present, and a future, and oftentimes there will be a character who's moving through a narrative. They have a world that they live in, they have a worldview, a way that they see the world and understand it, things that they're familiar with, the upbringing that this character has had, which informs them on how they make decisions, what they consider to be important. They have a perspective and a moral value. Now, as a story unfolds, especially good stories, this character will start to face different uncertainties. And as they do, they will find themselves in positions where they have to make certain decisions. They will have to prioritize certain things. Maybe they will have to sacrifice the comforts of home in order to go out into the unknown world, to defeat an enemy or to discover a hidden treasure. And along that path, they meet guides, uncertain dangers, obstacles, monsters. And throughout this process, the character then becomes transformed throughout the story. Joseph Campbell is famous for his hero's journey framework. There's a hero, a central character in an unfolding narrative, who goes through this process and becomes transformed. And by the end of the story, they've gained what we would call an elixir, a magic substance that they bring back home, which has the power to transform. It also benefits the people back home. Some great examples of the hero's journey narrative can be found in superhero movies, in epic sagas like Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings is another great example. In all of these stories, what we find is a representation of the world that you and I live in. And it informs us on certain values. It informs us about what dangers exist in the world, what friendship looks like, what it means to confront fear and insecurity, and what it means to uphold a certain mission and the costs that upholding that mission have on an individual. And these stories have always resonated with us because we as individuals who hear and watch these stories apply ourselves and inject ourselves into these narratives. We start to think about what it means for us. How do we make decisions in our lives? How do we confront the very real dangers that exist? How do we prioritize the things that matter to us most? And what does it mean to sacrifice those things? In short, stories give us the ability to embody someone else's worldview and perspective and to experience virtually the stakes and the mission of the character, the main character of a story. And this is why stories are so engaging. We learn about ourselves and the world through stories. If I were to ask you today, tell me about your childhood, or tell me about the reason why your personality is the way that it is, most likely you will tell me about a story, something that happened in the past, how it influenced and changed you, and what you learned from it. This is why stories matter. Stories teach us values, and it also gives us the ability to transmit those values and share those values with other people. That is the treasure that you share with your village, your tribe, your people. Now, in the context of digital content, we hear a lot about storytelling. And to be quite frank, it's kind of become a little bit of a buzzword. Most brands know that storytelling is important, and we see influencers as well creating quote-unquote yap content. Most likely you are in the content creation space like I am. You're working with clients or businesses. They've also probably heard the importance of narrative-driven storytelling and content creation. I think the mistake that most people actually make is that they tend to see storytelling as a content strategy rather than understanding, as we have laid out, the importance and the weight of storytelling and how it's a repository of human ideas and values. If we can understand stories for what they truly are and the power that they really have, then we can employ them in the right way to communicate with the people that we aspire to. The content creation space has become much more crowded as of late, and partly that has to do with the democratization of access to tools like Instagram and YouTube, not to mention technologies like this digital camera which I'm filming with right now. How do we actually utilize stories in the right way and create digital vehicles that transmit the right ideas to the people that we want to reach? What you need to understand is that whether we like it or not, everybody is understanding the world through a particular story. When you clicked on this video, it was as if you had opened a door and you were introduced to me as an individual. And so right now, we're sitting together and having a conversation. I'm sharing some ideas about ideas themselves and stories and content creation. And as you're listening, especially if you've made it up to this point, you're probably interested in some of these concepts. You're also thinking about what I am proposing and comparing my perspective with your own, seeing which things hold weight, how they collide and how they come together, how it applies to you in your life and your specific situation. Whenever you're creating content for another human being. And what I'd like to point out is a philosophical concept called the I-it relationship, which was coined by the philosopher Martin Buber. What he speaks about fervently is this idea that we've become so used to objectifying the world around us, where we as individuals see ourselves as the central subject, and everything that we come into contact with becomes an it. I happen to agree with Martin Buber's perspective that this worldview is deeply detrimental to the way that we interact with other people in the market, online, as well as in the real world. The alternative that he proposes is called the I-thou relationships, where you see the other person as a subject, another intricate human being. I'm sitting here alone in my house, but as I record this video, what I'm really hoping to achieve is to speak to someone else. I don't want to optimize my video so that I can hack your engagement and to extort you into acting in a certain way, or simply to garner attention and views. What I'm hoping to find is another person who is deeply interested in these concepts and someone who can genuinely gain a little bit of value or another perspective from what it is that I'm trying to share. And I think that this perspective completely changes the way that we interact with technology, as well as how we approach this vehicle of content creation. In the age of AI, our voices, our perspectives, our interests, and our behavior are all things that can be replicated by these large language models, and we're already seeing this occur. I think that people are quite anxious because we are often afraid that this technology has the ability to take away what it is that we call human behavior. It seems to mimic us quite well. What I'd like to propose as an alternate perspective is that, firstly, an AI cannot be a threat on humanity because it is simply a mimicry of humanity, not humanity itself. It has learned from the corpus of human writing and language, and its function is simply a calculation of the best possible word sequence through a probabilistic algorithm. That is what it is spitting out every single time you ask AI a question. It doesn't have stakes like you and I do. It doesn't have a family. It doesn't have a value hierarchy that differs from its own experience. It is simply giving you the best calculated response. The second point is that an AI cannot replicate your unique perspective. An AI hasn't gone through the life that you've gone through, your life experiences, the lessons that you've learned, the difficulties that you've faced, and the ways that you've experienced things that you might not even be able to express with words or language that you know deeply as a truth for yourself. These are the things that are irreplicable. It's your story. And so I would like to argue that the best way that you can connect with people, the best way that you can transmit your values and your ideas and your creation, whether that be a business, a video that you are genuinely passionate about, or an idea that you genuinely want to share with the world to leave an impact, the best way to do so is through the medium of your individual story. That is something that AI could never replicate. AI is a backwards-facing technology. It draws from the bucket of language that it's been fed and spits out something out of a permutation of what already exists. Your creative value exists in your unique interpretation, your unique stake. So when it comes to content creation, I think it's crucial that you start to reflect on what stories you are actually choosing to tell, what values that you want to transmit to other people, and how you want to use this technology, whether it be digital content creation or artificial intelligence, to scaffold that story and to use it as a tool to reach more people and to influence people in a positive way. And if we can do that in the correct way, the technology that we have at our disposal is something that can steer someone else in the right direction, can cause someone to see the world or see their circumstance or their work in a completely different way, and create an opportunity for someone else to make different decisions in their lives. If you want to learn more about storytelling and content creation and how we can start to implement and utilize this technology in the best way for your creative pursuit. I'd love to speak more with you. As this channel unfolds, I'll be speaking much more on content creation, approaching content creation in a non-conformist way to create businesses that genuinely provide positive influences for the people around us. Let me know what you thought. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you next time.